Chapter 1. When the Blame Landed on Me. The moment they blamed me for a $150,000 loss, I knew something was wrong. Because I had the real logs backed up, untouched, and what they showed in that meeting room was a lie. And when the regional director pointed his finger at me in front of the entire warehouse, accusing me of negligence, he had no idea that I, Aurelia Park, had already seen the pattern. Someone had altered our system after hours. Someone had forced my staff to sign false reports. Someone thought I would stay quiet the way others before me did. But they did not know I kept every timestamp, every approval, every truth they tried to bury. And once I saw the camera footage of Jonas sneaking into the dispatch room with a device in his hand, I realized this was bigger than a delayed route. This was a cover-up built by people who thought I would never fight back. So when they cut my access and tried to lock me out of my own data, they only pushed me closer to uncovering everything they hid. And that morning, when I walked into the warehouse and felt every pair of eyes avoiding mine, I knew the storm had already started, and I was done being their scapegoat. I walked into the Northway Fulfillment Group distribution center in Tacoma with my travel mug still warm in my hand, expecting an ordinary start to a long shift. Instead, I stepped straight into a wall of tense whispers and darting glances. People who usually greeted me every morning looked away as if I carried something contagious. The warehouse floor felt unnaturally quiet, except for the distant thud of pallets being moved. I had worked in logistics long enough to know that silence was never a good sign. I set my bag on my desk in the small operations office facing the loading bays and barely had time to pull up the route dashboard before an alert popped up announcing a mandatory meeting at 7:30. Mandatory with no explanation usually meant someone in upper management was about to make a mess that the rest of us had to clean. I stepped out into the main floor again and caught Megan's eye. She sat at her station checking inbound manifest sheets, her shoulders slightly hunched. When she saw me approaching, she straightened a little. "Rough morning already?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "You should get to the conference room early. Connor looks heated." My stomach tightened. It took a lot to shake Megan. I walked down the hallway toward the glass-walled room where meetings with upper management usually took place. I could see Connor Hale standing at the head of the table, flipping through a stack of papers with sharp and patient movements. A few supervisors shifted in their seats, pretending to read their notes. At exactly 7:30, Connor dropped the papers onto the table with a loud slap. The sound echoed across the room like a warning shot. Everyone sat still. Connor was 42, tall, polished, and known for keeping his shoes cleaner than the warehouse floor. His temper was something else he kept polished. "We have a serious problem. The Seattle to Bellevue route has been delayed 36 hours. 36. His voice sharpened on each repetition. "We have incurred a direct financial hit estimated at $150,000, and every sign points to one cause: failure of warehouse-level operations." My breath tightened, but I forced myself to remain expressionless. He continued talking as if he had practiced the speech in the mirror. "I expect accountability, and I expect it now." He clicked a remote and the screen behind him lit up with logs I recognized from our internal system, except something about them was wrong. He pointed at the timestamp lines. "These show incomplete staffing approvals and missing overtime authorizations. That falls under the responsibility of the Tacoma Warehouse Logistics Supervisor." He paused just long enough to make sure every pair of eyes swung in my direction. "Aurelia, this is on you." I swallowed hard and kept still. I made myself breathe through my nose while the room stayed silent. My job had never been glamorous. It was built on split-second route changes, tracking transponders, hours of double-checking load sheets, and protecting a team that handled 12 to 15,000 packages daily. For years, I kept things moving, I kept things clean, and I had never seen logs like the ones on that screen. A chime sounded, and a video window popped open showing the CFO, Evan Brooks, joining remotely. Even through pixelation, he looked smooth and confident. Dark suit, perfect tie, the kind of man who thought financial models mattered more than human beings moving pallets on concrete floors. He spoke without a greeting. If these logs are accurate, then this is an operational negligence issue, and the Tacoma warehouse must take immediate corrective action. Aurelia, we will need a written explanation of how this breakdown occurred. I heard Megan draw a short breath. Riley, sitting further down the table near the end, looked at his hands like he wanted to disappear. I kept my eyes on the screen, scanning the log details Connor had projected. Parts were missing, entire overtime request lines were gone, and the order of events made no logical sense. I recognized certain codes because I processed them daily. They had been altered. Connor folded his arms and said with cold certainty, "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" My voice was calm when I answered. "I need time to verify this data. These logs do not match the internal copies I see daily." He narrowed his eyes. "Internal copies? Are you claiming the company's system is wrong?" I kept my voice steady. "I am saying I keep a synchronized offline backup for safety because the tracking system sometimes lags during peak season. The data here does not match the backup on my laptop." Connor exhaled sharply through his nose. "That is convenient." I ignored the sarcasm. Years of managing a warehouse full of emergencies and frantic calls had taught me to compartmentalize. Still, the humiliation burned somewhere deep. I had led this warehouse team for years. My entire identity was built on responsibility, integrity, and keeping the floor running no matter how chaotic things got. Being accused of negligence in front of your own team felt like a blow to the ribcage. Connor dismissed the room. Meeting adjourned. Supervisors, return to your sections. Aurelia, stay behind. Everyone filed out quietly. Some avoided my eyes, some looked apologetic. Megan lingered for a second, but I gave her a slight nod telling her to go. She slipped out reluctantly. When the door closed, Connor leaned against the table and looked at me like a judge weighing a sentence. "I expect that report by the end of the day, and do not attempt to shift responsibility. All routing delays fall under your department." I met his gaze without flinching. Then, I turned and walked out. If I stayed another second, my temper might catch on fire, and anger never won in situations like this. The warehouse buzzed with a strange energy as I walked through it. People pretended to focus on tasks, but I could feel their attention tracing my steps. I kept walking until I reached my office. I sat in my chair for a long moment, staring at the dark computer screen. My hands felt cold, even though the room was warm. I finally opened my laptop and pulled up my offline sync folder. Rows of data appeared. Timestamped. Clean. Untouched. These were the logs I had seen every day. These were the logs I trusted, and they were nothing like the ones Connor had displayed. Someone had gone in and manipulated the official system. Someone with access above my level. I leaned back, letting the truth sink in. I had seen this pattern before. Upper management cutting staff to save money, routes being stretched too thin, then when things broke, they needed someone easy to blame. I had watched other supervisors take the fall. I always thought I would be too prepared, too disciplined, too careful to end up like them. But careful didn't matter when someone higher up wanted to cover their tracks. A sudden wave of pressure built in my chest. I closed the laptop and grabbed my phone. There was only one person who could steady me when things felt like they were spinning out of control. My mother picked up on the second ring. She lived alone in Eugene, Oregon, and had a way of making every crisis feel survivable. Her voice was warm. "Honey, you sound tight. What happened?" I exhaled slowly. "There was a delay on one of our critical routes. Management says it was my fault, says the logs show I missed approvals, but the data is wrong. Someone altered it." I could almost hear her thinking. Then she said softly, "You do not need to shout to prove the truth. Just stay calm and gather what you need." I rubbed my forehead. They humiliated me in front of everyone. You know who you are, and you always keep records, so use what you have and keep your head level. Her voice grounded me the way it always did. I thanked her and promised to call later. When the call ended, I felt a little more solid, a little less like the floor was tilting. I reopened my laptop. Before I could pull up more logs, a notification flashed at the top of the screen. It was an automated security alert from corporate. Access restriction issued. Sharing or exporting operational data is prohibited pending management review. My pulse kicked hard. It was too sudden and too perfectly timed. They were tightening the walls before I even started defending myself. I sat back in my chair staring at the glowing message on the screen. The warehouse sounds outside my door faded into a dull hum. There was something larger at play. Something that went beyond a delayed route or a simple oversight. If they wanted to restrict the truth, then the truth was exactly what I needed to uncover. I closed the laptop gently, my heartbeat steadying into something sharper and more focused. Whatever was happening had already begun, and I had no choice but to follow it to the end. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 2: Behind the Closed Doors. I waited until most of the warehouse lights had dimmed for the night before I finally stood up again. The building always felt different after hours. The concrete floors seemed to echo more sharply. The lines of racking cast long shadows, and the usual noise of conveyor belts faded into a low mechanical hum that sounded almost like breathing. I walked back to my office with the uneasy sense that I was being watched, even though I knew the floor was practically empty. I shut the door behind me and powered on my laptop, my hands steady even though my thoughts were anything but calm. The offline backup folder opened quickly. Rows of clean data filled the screen, more precise than anything the company's system had shown earlier. I scrolled through the entries for the Seattle to Bellevue route during the critical window. Then I saw them. 9 separate timestamps that had been modified in the official log but remained intact in my internal copy. Each altered line pointed toward a change in routing approvals or load dispatch times. More importantly, the altered times matched only one shift pattern. The routes were modified during the closing window on the day Jonas Parker had worked alone in route coordination. My heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from clarity. Someone had tampered with the system, and Jonas was right in the middle of it. I exported the clean log to my encrypted folder, shut my laptop, and headed toward the operations wing where Jonas usually worked late. The hallway lights buzzed faintly as I walked, and the sound grew louder as I reached the dispatch office. Jonas was inside, hunched over his desk with a crumpled energy drink can beside him. He startled when I pushed the half-open door wider. "I need to talk to you," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. He instantly looked defensive. His shoulders rose and he slid his chair back an inch. "About what?" My eyes stayed on him. "You were working the night those timestamps were changed." His jaw tightened. His gaze flicked to the monitors around him, then back to me. "I do not know what you mean." I stepped closer, letting the silence press between us. "The logs you submitted do not match the original data. Someone went in after hours and rewrote dispatch approvals. And by coincidence, the system shows your login at that exact time." Jonas's breath hitched. He looked away, rubbing his hands together. "I was told to update them." "By who?" He pressed his lips together like the words were trying to escape before he could stop them. He muttered, "Connor wanted them to match the new reporting format." "What reporting format?" My voice was steady, but each word carried an edge. I don't know. I just do what I am told. He looked terrified, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. But pity did not change what he had done. He lowered his voice to a whisper. He said there were inconsistencies and that he needed the numbers to align before they went to corporate. I studied his face. He was lying about part of it, but not all of it. Jonas had always craved approval from people in power. Connor had lifted him up quickly when everyone else thought he lacked discipline. It finally made sense. Connor had found someone easy to influence. Before I could push further, a sudden knock made both of us flinch. Riley stood in the doorway clutching a stack of papers in his shaking hands. "Aurelia, can I talk to you?" he said, glancing nervously at Jonas. I nodded and followed him out into the hallway. He kept looking over his shoulder like someone might be listening. "I did something I should not have," he whispered. We stopped near the back stairwell, where the hum of the ventilation system drowned out most sounds. Riley took a breath, then handed me a stapled packet. It was the incident report that Connor had mentioned earlier in the day. "He made me sign this," Riley's voice cracked. "He said if I wanted more hours, he would take care of it, but I had to sign." I flipped through the pages. The report claimed warehouse mishandling, miscounts, late staging, and incorrect load verification, all of it assigned to the warehouse. And at the bottom was Riley's signature, shaky and uneven. "Why did you sign it?" I asked quietly. He swallowed hard, because he told me it would affect the whole team if I did not, and he said you already agreed that it was the warehouse's fault. The sting hit deeper than I expected. I folded the report closed. "You know that's not true, Riley." He nodded miserably. "I'm sorry, I didn't know what else to do." My voice softened against my well. "I know he pressured you. You didn't do anything wrong by coming to me now. This matters." He reached into his pocket and took out a small piece of paper, folded 3 times. He handed it to me like it was something dangerous. I opened it carefully. In Connor's writing, I read the words Riley had described earlier. "Just sign it. You'll get more hours. Trust me." I stared at those words, feeling a cold calm rise through me. They were condescending, manipulative, and incriminating. I looked at Riley. "You did the right thing bringing this to me. I'll handle the rest." He nodded, his shoulders shaking slightly as the tension began to unwind from him. I watched him walk back toward the warehouse floor before I returned to my office. What I needed next was someone who knew the truth behind staffing approvals, someone who had access to the records Connor pretended to care about. So after closing my office door, I grabbed my coat, slipped out the side exit, and drove to a small cafe near the Tacoma Mall, where I knew Talia Nguyen liked to work late. The cafe was nearly empty. Warm light reflected off wooden tables, and a low jazz playlist played from hidden speakers. Talia sat in a corner booth typing something on her laptop. When she spotted me, her expression flickered with concern. "Aurelia, I heard about the delay. What's going on?" I slid into the seat across from her. "I need answers, and I'm hoping you can help me." She closed her laptop slowly. "This sounds serious." "It is." "Did Connor submit any staffing or overtime requests for our warehouse during the past year?" She blinked. "None. Not a single one." "That can't be right. He told corporate we were understaffed because approvals didn't go through." She shook her head firmly. "If there had been any requests, they would have come to my office, and nothing came from him at all. Not in 2024, not in 2025. I felt the familiar weight in my chest, but this time it wasn't fear. It was confirmation. It was structure. It was evidence folding neatly into place. Talia lowered her voice. There's more. Senior leadership pushed cost reduction targets at the end of last year. The CFO sent directives to cut operational expenses in the region aggressively. I felt something click, and Connor handled that privately. No risk reports, no escalation. She nodded. That's what worries me. He was supposed to log those cost-saving measures in the compliance reports, but none appeared. I leaned back, absorbing everything. This wasn't a single bad decision. It was a chain of them. Quiet budget cuts, concealed from HR and routed through operations, forced log changes, manipulated reports, and then all of it piled neatly onto me for the perfect scapegoat. If corporate believed I had let a shipment fall 36 hours behind, they would never look further. I looked at Talia. I need more than staffing records. I need confirmation from every angle. HR, camera archives, route access logs, email chains. She hesitated only a moment. I can help you find what falls under HR. Be careful with the rest. I nodded. I will be. Thank you. We exchanged a tight, understanding look before I stood and left the cafe. The air outside was cool against my face, carrying the familiar scent of damp pavement and the distant sound of traffic along the highway. I walked to my car with the growing clarity pulsing through me. This was bigger than a delay, bigger than a flawed log. This was a fully formed attempt to bury the consequences of budget cuts and route mismanagement by making me the shield that absorbed every hit. I drove back to the warehouse parking lot and sat in my car for a moment, watching the building through the windshield. Its metal exterior glowed faintly under the security lights. I thought of the people who depended on this place for steady work. I thought of every night I stayed late to keep our numbers clean. I thought of Connor's cold eyes during the morning meeting, the smooth certainty with which he declared me responsible for damage I had not caused. I exhaled slowly. If they wanted to hide the truth, then I would uncover every piece of it. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the warehouse door, feeling the resolve set in my spine. I would gather logs. I would gather camera footage. I would gather email threads and compliance gaps. I would gather witness statements like Riley's and contradictions like the ones Talia had given me. I would gather it all. By the time I reached my office again, I already knew that what lay ahead would be messy and difficult. But I also knew one thing with absolute certainty. The truth was on my side. And if I wanted to clear my name, I needed more than proof of a single lie. I needed to expose the entire structure behind it. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3. Data Never Lies. I reached the warehouse the next morning before sunrise. The sky outside was still a muted gray, and the building lights cast long shadows across the parking lot. I unlocked the side door quietly and stepped inside, letting the familiar smell of cardboard, diesel residue, and cold concrete steady my breathing. If I wanted to understand what had been done to the system, I needed eyes on the cameras. And I needed Megan with me, because she knew the internal archive better than anyone. I found her in the break room pouring coffee into a chipped ceramic mug. She looked up quickly when she heard my footsteps. "Aurelia, you are in early." "I need your help," I said. "We have to check the camera logs from the night Jonas was on dispatch." Her eyebrows drew together. "You really think he touched the system?" "I know someone did," I said, "and the timestamps line up with his shift." She hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Then let us go." We walked down the hall to the security office. The room was dark except for the glow of multiple monitors. Megan pulled the security chair forward and began typing her credentials. The archive loaded slowly, a spinning wheel of dread that seemed to echo my heartbeat. "What time do we check first?" she asked. 9:15 to 10, I said. That is when the altered logs were created. She navigated to the camera facing the dispatch room. The footage flickered, then sharpened into a grainy black and white image of the office corridor. We watched several empty minutes pass until the timestamp reached 9:26. Jonas appeared in the frame, wearing a jacket he never wore during day shifts and glancing repeatedly over his shoulder. He carried his backpack close to his chest and walked with hurried, uneven steps. Megan whispered, "He looks nervous." I leaned closer. "Zoom in, if you can." She enlarged the image. Jonas stopped at the dispatch door, checked the hallway again, then used his badge to enter. After a moment, the interior lights came on, revealing him walking straight to the terminal. We watched in silence as he logged in, typed something rapidly, then plugged a small device into the USB port. A shiver ran down my spine. I paused. I said quietly, "Pause it." Megan froze the screen. The timestamp in the top corner read 9:26. I opened my laptop and pulled up the internal log I had saved. The timestamp on the altered entries read 9:26. They matched perfectly. Megan let out a breath. "He really did it." I nodded slowly. The official report said no one accessed the system that night. Someone tried to hide this. We watched Jonas for another 10 minutes. After finishing whatever he was doing, he unplugged the device, deleted his session, and left with the same quick, furtive movements. When the footage ended, Megan leaned back in her chair and rubbed her forehead. "I do not understand why he would risk this." "He did not do it for himself," I said. "He did it for Connor." She looked at me with tired eyes. "So what now?" "Now we keep going," I said. "We need everything that proves the system was altered, and all of it needs to match the internal log." Megan nodded and began exporting the clips. While she worked, I stared at the blank wall, memories slowly rising like tidewater. I remembered the early years from 2018 through 2022 when I designed the first version of our route verification process. I remembered how proud I had been of our 98% on-time record. Back then, Connor had praised me constantly. He was not in leadership yet and had treated me like a valuable partner. He would stand beside me on the loading dock, smiling when a complex route closed without a hitch. Then in early 2023, he was promoted to Regional Operations Director. His tone shifted almost overnight. He stopped asking for my input during meetings and started cutting me off. He dismissed my proposals for hiring seasonal support and told me to make do with what I had. Instead of seeing my experience as an asset, he treated it like a threat. And slowly, I watched him sideline every female manager in the region, pulling in his own circle of hand-picked male coordinators. A familiar ache settled in my chest as I remembered those changes. I had ignored the signs to keep the peace. Now I wondered if he had been planning to use me as a shield long before this. Megan's voice pulled me back. "These clips are saved. What else do we check?" I confirmed the load departure times with the customer, because if the logs here were altered, the shipping partner will have the true timestamps. She looked uncertain. "You want to call Mrs. Winton?" "Yes," I said. "She has always been direct with me." We stepped into my office and I dialed her number from my work phone. After 2 rings, she answered. "Hello, this is Linton Distribution." "Hi, this is Aurelia Park with Northway Fulfillment Group. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Not at all," she said warmly. "How can I help you?" "I just need clarification on the Seattle to Bellevue run from earlier this week. Do you have the departure times logged in your end?" She made a little clicking noise, typing something in the background. Then she said, "Yes, I do. The truck left your facility on time, 4:03 in the morning. We scanned it at arrival and the timestamp matches the expected window. But your company later reported that the load was delayed from your warehouse. I thought it was odd." I closed my eyes briefly. "Did you record any discrepancy on your side?" "None. From our standpoint, the shipment was perfectly punctual. Is something wrong?" "No," I said quickly. "I just needed to verify the records." "Thank you for your help." "Of course. You have always been reliable." Her words hit deeper than I expected. I swallowed a knot rising in my throat and hung up.
Megan watched me, quiet but attentive. She confirmed it, I said. The load left on time. Whatever delay they're blaming on the warehouse came from altered data. Megan sat down heavily in the chair across from me. So it's really happening. They're trying to frame this on you. I opened my laptop with a heavy exhale. Then we keep digging. She moved to the corner computer and pulled up the email archives that warehouse supervisors could access. After a moment, she stiffened. Aurelia, you need to see this. I stood beside her as she clicked open a message thread. It was between Connor and the CFO, Evan Brooks. The subject line was the Seattle Bellevue route. The email chain began several weeks before the delay. Connor had written, cost cuts need to reflect quarterly goals. Routing delays can be shifted to warehouse to avoid attention. Ensure HR does not receive overtime reports. Evan had replied, minimize hiring requests. If incidents occur, attribute to warehouse performance. We cannot reveal the staffing reductions. The words blurred for a moment as a pulse of anger surged through me. Not a fiery rage, but a cold, precise disappointment. I had spent years trying to keep the warehouse stable while they quietly starved us of the resources we needed. Megan looked at me. This is enough to take to corporate. It is enough, but I want everything. She nodded and began exporting the email chain. I saved a copy to my encrypted folder, my fingers trembling slightly. Before I could move on to the next step, my monitor flashed. A new notification appeared. Access denied. Account locked for security review. Megan sucked in a breath. They shut down your email. I stared at the screen, the message glowing like a warning. They know someone is pulling the truth. But I did not panic. Every piece of evidence we had gathered so far was already saved to my external drive and uploaded to a private cloud system. Losing email access meant nothing now. They had waited too long to close the door. Megan pulled her chair closer. What do we do next? I took a slow breath. We build the case. Not just logs, not just footage, everything. So when we go to legal, there is nothing they can twist. She nodded in agreement. Then I am with you. Whatever you need. Her loyalty gave me strength. I pressed my palms briefly against the desk, grounding myself. So much of my life had spent in this warehouse, overseeing the rise and fall of thousands of crates. But this time, the weight sitting in front of me was not cardboard or freight. It was the truth. And the truth was heavier than anything we had ever moved across these floors. I gathered the files into a single offline folder, naming it clearly in case anything ever happened to me or my account access. I plugged in my encrypted drive, copied the entire directory, then ejected it and slipped it into my jacket pocket. When I turned back to Megan, she was watching me with steady determination. She said nothing, but I knew she understood. We were past speculation, past doubt, past fear. We had proof. And now it was time to take the next step. I straightened my shoulders, shut my laptop, and looked around my office one more time. The walls, the desk, the shelves, the blinking tracking board behind me. I had built years of my life in this room. Now it would be the place where I gathered the evidence that could topple an entire chain of lies. Everything was ready, and it was time to bring it forward. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 4. Collapse of Their Lies. I scheduled a meeting with Adrian Cole the next morning and drove to the Bellevue regional office with the external drive inside my coat pocket. The building rolls like a clean glass pillar against the morning sky, polished and modern in a way my warehouse never was. Inside, everything smelled of fresh paper and faint citrus cleaner. The silence felt heavier than the echoing space of Tacoma. Here, important decisions were made behind closed doors. Adrian was waiting for me in a small conference room, sleeves rolled up, glasses resting low on his nose as he scanned a stack of papers. He looked up as soon as I entered. Aurelia, sit down. We have a lot to go through.
I sat across from him, my heart steady but my fingers lightly trembling as I placed the encrypted drive on the table. He picked it up carefully, almost ceremonially, as if acknowledging the weight of what it contained. "I reviewed the initial summary you sent," he said. "This is not a small situation. Walk me through everything, but do it in order. Start from when you first noticed discrepancies." I exhaled and began with the altered logs, then the camera footage, the email exchanges, the customer confirmation, and the attempted suppression of staffing reports. With each detail, Adrian's expression tightened further. When I finished, he leaned back, folding his hands. "You realize what this means?" "I do." My voice was steady. He nodded slowly. "Then you need to prepare yourself, because after today, there is no going back." He paused and held my eyes with a seriousness that sank into me like a weight. "Once we take this to corporate, everything changes for everyone involved, including you. Are you ready for that?" "I am," I said quietly. "I did not choose this, but I am not backing down." He drew in a breath and stood. "Then let us get the files organized by timeline. They will have no room to twist anything if the order is clear." We spent the next 2 hours sorting the evidence chronologically, each item marked from 2018 to early 2025. My logs, the video clip from the night Jonas accessed the system, the HR staffing void, the customer timestamp, and finally the chain of emails between Connor and Evan. By the time we finished, the table was covered in neatly lined sheets, each backed by digital copies ready to present. Adrian gathered everything into a presentation binder and shut it with a firm click. "We are meeting corporate at 2 in the main boardroom. You should prepare for strong reactions." "What about Connor and Evan?" "They will be there. They always insist on being present when operational issues surface. This time, it will not work in their favor." The way he said it made something inside me exhale. Not triumph, not anticipation, just release. At 1:58, we walked into the boardroom. The long, polished table gleamed under recessed lighting, and large windows overlooked the skyline. Connor was already there, pacing near the far end with a tight jaw. Evan sat composed but stiff, eyes tracking every movement. HR was represented by Talia, who gave me a small, supportive nod. 2 corporate leadership members from Seattle were present as well, both of them watching the room with cautious neutrality. Adrian motioned for me to sit beside him. When the door finally closed, he began. "Thank you for meeting with us. We have critical information regarding the Seattle-Bellevue routing delay." Connor cut in immediately. "We have already investigated that. There is no need for more drama." Adrian ignored him and opened the binder. "We request that you review the documented timeline before drawing conclusions." The first pages were the original logs I had saved. Clean timestamps, correct routing orders, approved overtime requests. Adrian slid them across the table. Corporate leadership leaned forward to examine them. Then he revealed the altered logs from the official system. The discrepancies were so stark that even Evan stiffened. One of the corporate leads spoke calmly. "Why do these not match?" Connor answered without hesitation. "The warehouse supervisor must have made late changes. That is why the data looks off. She probably forgot to approve something and is now trying to cover it up." Adrian didn't flinch. He opened the laptop he had brought and tapped the trackpad. "Please watch this." He projected the camera footage onto the large screen. Jonas appeared at 9:22, looking over his shoulder, entering the dispatch room, plugging in a device, typing rapidly. The silence felt heavier than the echoing space of Tacoma. No one spoke, not even Connor. Adrian let the video play for 30 seconds more before stopping it. This was the night before the altered data entered the system. A quiet gasp came from farther down the table. Talia closed her eyes briefly, then looked at me with visible anger on my behalf. Connor's face flushed. This is taken out of context. He was doing routine work. Adrian slid the next document forward. This document shows that the warehouse was fully staffed during that week. He passed another sheet. This shows that no overtime requests were submitted to HR, contradicting what Mr. Hale stated during the internal meeting. Talia spoke softly but firmly. That is correct. We received nothing at all from operations during that period. Adrian continued, turning page after page, until the next major piece was reached: the email chain between Connor and Evan. Corporate leadership read silently. Then one of them looked up. Mr. Hill, explain this statement. He read out loud. Shift delays to warehouse. Do not alert HR about the staffing shortages. Connor stumbled over his breath. I didn't mean it the way it sounds. It's normal to lighten reports to prevent panic. Another corporate member turned the page. Mr. Brooks, you instructed the cost reductions, but you did not log them in the risk reports. That violates compliance protocol. Evan's jaw clenched. Those reports were being prepared. The timing was unfortunate. The delays were not related to our decisions. I felt a pulse of cold disbelief. Even now, he was lying. Adrian opened the customer audit. Mrs. Linton confirmed the truck left on time. The supposed delay occurred only in the modified logs. The original logs match her records. The altered logs do not. A hush spread across the room. Connor pointed at me suddenly, desperate. She had access to the logs. She could have modified them herself. I could not, I said calmly. I do not have clearance to access the routing database after hours. Jonas does, and the video proves he did. Connor's voice cracked. He acted alone. That was when Adrian turned to the final printed email and slid it across the table. The one where Connor had written to Evan, unmistakably in his own words, instructing to blame the warehouse. Corporate read it. One raised his head slowly. This is extremely concerning. Connor sank into his chair. His hands trembled as he tried to speak. I was under pressure. Evan told me to keep things quiet. I didn't think it would go this far. Evan froze. You're twisting my words. No, Adrian said sharply. This is all documented. Another wave of silence hit the room. Heavy. I felt the weight of months of manipulation, gaslighting, and blame pressing outward, finally cracking under the pressure of truth. Corporate leadership exchanged looks, then one spoke clearly. Effective immediately, Mr. Hale. You are suspended pending full investigation. Connor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. They turned to Evan. You are placed under internal review. All financial directives issued in the last 3 quarters will be audited. Evan's face turned a color I had never seen on a human being. We can resolve this internally, he said low and urgently. There is no need for public escalation. We can fix this quietly. I can make sure Aurelia receives whatever she wants. I stared at him, stunned by his audacity. I don't want anything from you. I want the truth to be acknowledged. Adrian's voice was iron. There will be no private resolution. Corporate leadership continued, unrelenting. Mr. Parker will be required to surrender his system credentials before
leaving the premises. His employment is terminated. Jonas, who had been silent the entire time in the corner of the room, stood shakily and left without a word. The meeting ended not with shouting or threats, but a cold, final clarity. The truth had spoken for itself. As people began gathering their papers, I stood up slowly. My knees felt strangely light, not weak, not trembling, just light, as if a weight I had carried for months had suddenly shifted off my body. Adrian touched my arm lightly. "You handled yourself with absolute professionalism." I nodded, still processing the moment. As I walked out of the boardroom and into the bright hallway, the air felt different, cool, clean, like stepping outside after a storm has finally broken. It did not feel like victory. It felt like release. Chapter 5: When the Truth Stands on Its Own. I drove back to Tacoma that evening with the strange quiet that follows a storm. The sky was clearing, streaked with late winter light, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without something tightening inside my chest. The warehouse lights glowed softly as I passed by, and I realized that the building no longer felt like a place of accusation. It was simply a place where people worked hard and deserved honesty from the ones above them. The weight that had been pressing on me for so long had finally lifted, leaving room for something steadier and calmer to grow. In the days that followed, everything moved fast. Corporate opened a full-scale audit of the entire regional logistics network, not just Tacoma. They called in an outside compliance team at the beginning of 2025 and began inspecting every route, every staffing request, every communication that had been filtered through Connor and Evan. What they uncovered went far beyond my case. Budgets manipulated without documentation, seasonal staffing requests blocked with no explanation, routing delays misattributed across 3 different warehouses. My situation was only one piece of a much larger pattern. For the first time since the mess began, I felt a quiet vindication instead of fear. It was not pride, exactly, more like a settling of the ground beneath my feet. A week later, my work phone rang. I was on the warehouse floor when I answered, surrounded by the hum of forklifts and the smell of wooden pallets. It was one of the senior directors from Seattle HQ. "Aurelia, we have reviewed your role in stabilizing the Tacoma facility and your handling of this recent investigation. We would like you to consider a transition to Seattle headquarters. The position is Senior Process Lead. You would be overseeing regional redesign of workflow and compliance." I stood very still, one hand resting on a stack of outbound manifests. The offer hit deeper than I expected. This was not just a promotion. It was the kind of role I had quietly worked towards since 2018, when I first created the original routing verification model. I accepted the position with a steady voice, though my heart was pounding. When I told Megan, she hugged me so hard that my ribs protested. Her eyes were shiny, full of relief and pride. Riley shook my hand with shy excitement, his usual nervousness replaced by something brighter. He told me, "They offered me full-time this morning, benefits and all. I guess my record is clean now." I smiled at him. "You earned it. No one can take that away from you." Megan came rushing over again. "Guess what? They want me to lead the inbound team. Team lead. Can you believe it?" I had believed it long before she ever did, but seeing her light up felt like a victory of its own. Even Talia, who had remained steady through the entire ordeal, received a new placement. Compliance requested her for a permanent role in their department. When she called to tell me, her voice carried something like relief. She told me, "I always wanted to work where truth mattered more than appearances. Thank you for bringing everything forward. It forced a change the region needed." It was strange how the pieces began to fall into place, not with loud announcements, but with quiet, steady corrections, the kind that come when people finally stop pretending and start rebuilding instead.
A few weeks later, when my transition to Seattle was official, I packed up my small office in Tacoma. I ran my hand over the old, worn desk and felt a wave of memories rush through me. Nights spent rerouting loads during storms, early mornings managing holiday surges, countless moments of frustration and also pride. This warehouse had shaped me in ways I did not fully understand until I was leaving it. Before heading out, I took one last walk through the floor. The people working there had endured years of mismanagement without complaint. They had carried the weight that leadership had tried to hide. They deserved better. And now, slowly, they would get it. I decided to visit my mother in Oregon before reporting to Seattle HQ. The drive to Eugene felt peaceful in a way I had not felt in months. I arrived just before sunset. Her house stood warm and familiar at the top of a quiet street lined with bare winter trees. She opened the door before I even reached the porch. Her voice softened as she looked at me. "Honey, something in your face looks lighter." I let out a small laugh and stepped inside. "It feels lighter." We sat at her kitchen table drinking tea the way we always did when something important needed to be said. I told her everything. The meeting in Bellevue, the evidence, the way the truth had finally been acknowledged, the new position waiting for me in Seattle. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around her mug, her eyes full of something warm and proud. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing. Not to punish anyone, not to hurt anyone, but to protect the people who work with you, the ones who show up every day and give everything they have. You did it for them as much as for yourself." Her words slipped into the quiet space inside me that still needed reassurance. And in that moment, everything settled into place. After dinner, we walked outside and watched the sky shift from pale gold to soft blue. I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. Revenge was never the goal, not truly. What I wanted was honesty. What I fought for was integrity. And what I gained was the knowledge that truth could stand on its own, without screaming, without breaking, without tearing anyone apart. It simply needed to be revealed. When I returned to Tacoma the next morning to finish my final week before the move, the atmosphere at the warehouse felt different. People greeted me openly again. Some stopped me to say thank you, others simply nodded with quiet acknowledgement. And I realized something I had not expected. Clearing my name had not only protected my future, it had given everyone else permission to trust the process again. On my last afternoon, I stood outside near the loading dock, watching the trucks pull away towards Seattle, the engines humming like a steady heartbeat. I thought of how far I had come since 2018, how many challenges I had pushed through, how often I had stayed quiet even when things felt unfair. I was done being quiet. Not loud, not angry, just honest, steady, certain. As I prepared to lock up my office for the final time, a thought settled comfortably in my mind. If someone ever tries to bury you under their mistakes, they forget something important. The truth does not disappear. It waits. And when it comes forward, it stands on its own without needing anyone to shout for it. Before closing my laptop, I recorded a final message for myself, something to carry into the next chapter of my life. If someone has ever blamed you just to hide their own wrongdoing, remember that proof speaks louder than rage. The truth will protect you when you protect it. And if you have ever lived through something like this, share your story. Your voice matters more than you think. It was the gentlest kind of call to stand together, not in anger, but in clarity. Then I closed my office door and stepped into my new beginning.